Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking again with Batya Ungar-Sargon. Batya is the opinions editor at Newsweek, and she's also an author. Her books include Bad News, How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy, and her latest book is Second Class, How Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women. Hi Batya, thank you for coming back on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with you again.
So your new book, How Elites Betrayed America's Working Class, working men and women. Okay, so what was your impetus for writing it?
So, when I was writing my last book, it really was about the class divide. I argued that the reason our media is so terrible is not primarily because it's left, although of course it is left, but because it is woke, and that wokeness is really a smokescreen for the class divide and the ways in which the left today is made up primarily of quite wealthy white progressives by and large. And that these people, to mask the ways in which they have benefited from income inequality and are really part of the elites right now, came up with this very radical discourse around race and gender so that they could still portray themselves as the good guys and on the side of the little guy, when in fact they had become not just on the side of power, but powerful in their own right. And I uncovered this big sort of class divide because journalists used to be working class. They used to come from the working class, and now they come from the elites. They all have sort of very elite university degrees, multiple degrees. It's the most over-credentialed industry in the United States. And when I was promoting the book, I kind of was sort of reaching for a book that would explain to people the gap between the culture among these progressive elites and among like average Americans, working class Americans, the kind of people journalists used to be. And the only books that existed that really had a kind of ethnography of the working class were all written by progressive academics. And it was really funny because they would sort of go and interview lots of working class people. And the working class people would say to them, "We hate welfare, we hate welfare, we hate welfare, we hate welfare." And the conclusion of all of these books was, you see, what they really need is more welfare. It was like they couldn't think their way out of the redistributive model that is kind of like, just bread and butter on the left. There's no alternative for them. And what the working class really wants is not welfare. They don't want handouts. They don't feel entitled to the fruits of someone else's labor. What they want is an economy that protects their labor and their hard work, through a series of protectionist measures. And as a result, they really believe deeply in sort of autonomy. Like the whole working class culture is fueled by a belief in self-reliance and self-determination and freedom and hard work, and that hard work should grant you a level of freedom. All of these ideas that are like really basic to like, the Greek and Roman democracy and the ways that we think about democracy, but are very alien to our elites, which are very motivated by a kind of paternalistic culture because they love institutions because institutions have delivered for them. And so that gap between paternalism and autonomy, I really wanted to explore. And I really wanted to give people a sense of who the American working class is because we've sort of deplatformed them from the American public square. And so that was the impetus behind the book.
Great. Just sort of on that, like the way I see this, and I mean, I've seen it in my life as well, is I'm going to stick with the religious comparison here and call them elites or whatever. So when these people get out of university, they see themselves as, keepers of knowledge and we're the working class. Well, they don't know anything. So we have to go out and spread the good word or spread the good news. And because the working class isn't accepting that good news, they hold them in disdain. I mean, it's kind of the communist revolution wouldn't have happened without the farmers in Russia, and Marx hated the farmers, right? So I kind of look at it like that. These are the priestly classes, or these are the, you know, they're the evangelists going out to evangelize this new faith, and because the working class isn't A, accepting the new faith, and B, is kind of bucking against it because they're showing that no, this is not what we want. And if you go to a construction site or if you go to, any blue collar working site, there is no real, friction between races and stuff. People are just doing their job and getting along. I mean, I saw this when I worked with the military as well. So, I mean, that was my take on why, there's that disdain for the working class, whether, in the West in general.
There is enormous disdain for the working class. I think that disdain turned into hatred after the election of Donald Trump. Because the working class was revealed to have power and the elites couldn't stand that because they used that power to sort of undermine the interests of the elites. The reason I resist the religious analogy is not just because I'm religious, but also because the I think that there's a lot of sort of gaslighting going on, but also self-gaslighting. Like, um, if you stop the average progressive, who works in the knowledge industry and is making, $210,000 a year, in some sort of like quasi-creative knowledge industry job, right? And you ask them why they support open borders, or why they oppose sort of draconian, as they would call them, attempts to control the border, they will not say to you the truth, which is because it's in my economic interest because I'm the employer of low wage laborers, right? They won't, that's the truth. That's the reason the Democrats did a 180 on immigration. They used to support controlling the border. Now they support opening the border because they used to support labor. That was their base. And now they support the college educated elites who are the consumers of this labor. That's why the Democratic Party did this 180. Um, they won't say that. They'll say, well, these people have so much less than me. By what right do I keep them out of this country? Louis C.K. has recently been like, yeah, we have no right as Americans to live in such a better country than El Salvador or Venezuela. Like, yeah, we owe it to them to import those people and bring up, in a race to the bottom and bring our standard of living down to where they're at. That's what they'll say. They'll use this kind of moral argument, but it is a smokescreen for an economic argument. So the elites on the left will say that the working class is voting against their economic interests, whereas the truth is that they are voting in their economic interests, just like everybody else. And so that sort of double consciousness where, they're extremely wrong about something, and they're wrong about it to the extent that it is literally putting money in their pockets. Like, to me, that's kind of not really how religion works. Like, the extent to which they believe this stuff is really like, like, do they not realize that they're being totally hypocritical, like, at every moment? No one really believed in defund the police, even the people pushing it. Like, they didn't really want it. But they just said it. And that's not really how I feel like that's not how religion works. Like, a central component of religion is having a lot of humility and having a really high standard for yourself and a kind of more generous standard for other people. And with the wokes, it's kind of the opposite. Like, they hold themselves to an unbelievably low standard and everybody else is like evil. So to me, it sort of makes more sense when you think about it as like, I think about it as kind of like topping from the bottom. Like, they're kind of like, we're the weak ones, now do everything we say. Like, you have more power now, so you have to do exactly what we want. And of course, the funny, it's nonsense. They have a lot of power, but
Hmm.
they by proxy affiliate themselves with groups that they see as powerless, like trans people or black people or Palestinians, in order to sort of steal valor from them and then say, well, we have the moral high ground because we are affiliated with the powerless. It's actually very Christian.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this sort of like this hatred of agency, this hatred of self-determination, this hatred of Israel for protecting itself, or of America for having strength, or the working class for working and then voting in their economic interests, right? So all of which is to say, like, I totally hear where you're coming from, but I see it, I guess, a little bit differently.
Okay, I mean, the religion thing, I mean, maybe I should have said a fundamentalist religion, or, because if you take your average everyday moderate Christian, it's a different kettle of fish than if you take, you know, um, like a young earth creationist, or, like one of the Dominion Christians who want to go back to instilling the Ten Commandments as rule of law, right? Like, there is a difference, and there is a lot of hypocrisy in like fundamentalist faiths. I mean, I always joke around about it was in The Simpsons. I think it was Ned Flanders. He's like, why are you doing this to me, God? I did everything in the Bible that, everything the Bible says, even the stuff that contradicts the other stuff. Right. And so, and then, so there is hypocrisy in religion as well. So maybe I should have said fundamentalist faith instead of just a blanket religion thing. Because I mean, there are very cult-like aspects to it. One of the things you mentioned kind of made me, well, laugh a little bit. It's just my dad. So my dad owned a factory, and people would come in and say, "Hey, you're from India. I know this guy. He's here on a tourist visa. He wants to stay in Canada. Can you give him a job so he can stay here?" My dad's like, "Nope, I'm not going to hire him. Let him go get a visa. I had to do all that." But yet, my dad would take advantage of every program the government had to hire refugees, to hire new immigrants. And so, there was one, I think it was at one point he was taking, there were refugees coming in from Sri Lanka, and he hired a bunch of them, and the government was paying, like, he had to pay them $1 an hour, and the government would pay the rest of their hourly wage.
Wow.
And so my dad's like, I'm taking advantage of that. Why not? So he had nothing opposed to immigration per se, but he had opposition to illegal immigration. Um, but he was fully, he was like, why shouldn't I take advantage of this program? Um, which, I understand. Um, you brought up Israel and Palestine. I didn't really want to go into that too much, but I think it kind of, if you look at who's supporting Hamas and who's supporting Israel, just in a general sense, it's university kids and it's faculty that are,
Yeah.
and then it's on the other side, it's more or less working class people who are saying no. Like, they might not be 100% behind Israel, but they're opposed to Hamas and they're opposed to all this other stuff. And it's them that are kind of pushing back. So I don't know if that's thing that's creating this divide, or if it's the whole look of like the colonialism and stuff like that. Compared to Canada. Oh, so we had 100 and some odd churches burnt in the last couple of years. Our prime minister, when they discovered they discovered some anomalies at a residential school in Kamloops, and then that was a whole big thing. Oh, 215 graves, blah 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 blah, went on. Our flags were at half mast at all government buildings for 6 months, and Trudeau went on the whole post-colonial rant. And when churches started getting vandalized and burnt originally, he's like, "Oh well, I can understand where people's anger comes from," and it's the same
Oh my God.
it's the same excuses that were being given to these Palestinian, pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protesters. Oh, well, you have to understand their anger, where it's coming from, and the whole colonialism thing. And I mean, they've still been pretty much radio silent. Like, there's radio silence on these burnt churches. Every now and then you get, a, a token tweet or something like that.
Who's burning them?
Uh, I'm gonna go with the woke, because even the indigenous people in Canada are saying, please don't burn the churches. I mean, there was a Korean church that was burnt. There were churches on native reserves that were burnt. There are just churches in general. Like, there was one recently, I think it was one of the oldest churches in Toronto that just got burnt down. Um, and like I said, radio silence. So it's in protest of the quote unquote all the dead bodies and the mass graves of the children from the residential schools, and not one body has been found. Like, that first initial site, they found a tooth and it turned out to be an animal tooth. Like, they haven't found anything. And it's
Trudeau's the worst. He's just
oh
the
oh he,
worst.
he's awful. I mean, okay, I don't want to go too much of a rant here, but because of the Palestinian thing, are so I've been saying for a while now that, like, if you're woke, you're anti-Semitic. I've been seeing it since about 2018, and I've been calling it out. So they hired a guy to teach anti-racism to the CBC, which is our national broadcaster. The guy was living in Lebanon with a Canadian passport, and he was a raging anti-Semite. Um, they gave him a contract. He's still under contract, but he's not getting paid anymore. Uh, then now, just recently, our Minister of Justice, who's introducing this really, really rigid speech law, is hiring someone for Human Rights Commission. Same thing, like, raging anti-Semite, and it's because these people spoke the same language of anti-racism that our government uses, that they got hired. And I'm like, can't you see, you know, there's a clear correlation, if not a causation, between wokeness and anti-Semitism. And I'm like, can't you see it? Like, can't you see these people? Like, that's what you're doing. Like, that's what our government's doing anyways. Sorry. Get the
Yeah, I feel like um there's like in Canada, there's this weird compliance from the Canadian people, like outside of Alberta. It seems like people just are kind of like, there's almost this like lack of self-esteem to say, um, actually, no, like we're gonna be like super patriotic and we're not gonna allow these canards to spread. Like it's weird. Like it seemed like there was a lot less pushback to the COVID regime, even though it was so extreme and punishing. And, um, like it's just like recently in the last 5 years, it seemed like, Trudeau has emerged as this kind of like face of like liberal authoritarianism, where he like smiles and pushes this kind of like left-wing liberal line while actually using it to like radically restrict the freedoms of Canadian citizens. I don't know if you know about the Coots Four, these four
yeah,
guys
yeah,
who
yeah.
were arrested in Alberta over the Freedom Convoy, and two of them had all charges dropped against them. Two of them are on trial now. They're effectively political prisoners. The charges against them are ridiculous, and they are being used to justify Trudeau's invocation of the Emergencies Act to strip all Canadians of all civil liberties in the wake of the truckers convoy, which was like a massive non-violent resistance to an actual fascist regime trying to force people to put something in their bodies, namely the vaccine, when they didn't want to, on pain of losing their livelihoods, which is insane. And like it's insane that that was done in the name of liberalism, in the name of like leftism, and it just sort of supports this idea that the class divide um, is extremely important. I mean, it's not an accident that it was truck drivers who stood up and said, like, actually, no, like we work autonomously alone in our rigs. By what right do you tell us what we are going to put in our bodies if we want to feed our families? Like the whole thing was so obvious, and yet there was like very little like pushback in Canada. Most of the pushback from like major figures came from the United States and, the Fox News Republican Party type. So I feel like there is this sort of like, I feel like Canada's kind of gone off the rails.
Okay, well, yeah, Canada has, but I think part of the reason is okay, well, there's a little bit of glimmer of hope. We had a by-election in Toronto the other night, and this was a liberal stronghold. They'd held it for something like 30 years, and they lost. They lost the conservative candidate in that riding, which was huge. The conservatives were expecting a good showing, but coming in second, they won by a few percent, and they won the riding. So that's, I mean, in that particular writing, that's a huge thing that, even if it was close, it's a huge thing that the Conservatives won. But the other thing about Canada is there was a joke in the late eight or in the 80s, I don't know if it was the late 80s, but that the only thing Canadians are proud of is that we're not Americans. And and Trudeau pushed that. So anytime someone said something, oh, that's American style politics, and then when with Trump being in, oh, that's just Trump style politics. Oh, you're bringing Trumpism into Canada, and Canadians clap like trained seals. And it
Yeah.
just, so yeah, there was not a lot of pushback. I mean, they are starting to wake up and say enough's enough. Like they've had enough of Trudeau, they've had enough of the corruption. But yeah, it depends on who you speak to. Like, so I live in Montreal. I was actually just in Toronto this weekend, and if I go downtown and I go to a club or I go to a restaurant, and listen to the talk, it's mainly, you know, the professional class, the laptop class or whatever, and they're spewing all the woke nonsense. And um, if I go outside the city a little bit, even to some of the suburbs, or go to some of the working class bars in town, it's the exact opposite of what you're hearing. Um, I was like I said, I was in Toronto this weekend, same thing. I mean, I was around with a bunch of people who were. There's an organization in Canada called Lighthouse that's pushing back on a lot of the woke stuff, especially in education. Um, and so I was at one of their events, and so most of the people there were obviously on board with my way of thinking, but going to restaurants and stuff, same thing. So I think that more than anything in Canada shows, depending on where you live. So that's why you're having like Alberta pushing back. You're having the prairie provinces push back a little bit.
The
Um,
thing that bothers me the most is that when like the left does realize that they got something wrong, like with COVID, They never admit it. They never acknowledge, like, we were wrong and the people without college degrees were right. And therefore, we're going to re examine our contempt for them because, look, they got this right. And we, the so called experts, got it wrong. Like, there's never any acknowledgement. There's never any humility. The next time around, they never say, well, we got this one so wrong and they got it so right. Maybe this time we'll hear what they have to say. Like, never, ever, ever. When they get caught red-handed, they just move on. Like there's so much gaslighting.
Oh yeah, no, that's they can't admit that they're wrong because if they admit that they're wrong, then they have to admit that they're wrong in a whole lot of stuff. That's why um I see some people who I followed during COVID and or even before who would go along with the woke stuff or go along with the COVID stuff. And now they've done a 180, but they're not admitting that, oh, I made these mistakes. I was wrong. I shouldn't have said that. And they're just like, I was always on this page. It's like you lying sack of shit. No, you weren't. Sorry, but like I mean that's my feeling about stuff like that is like apologize. Just you don't have to apologize. Just admit I was wrong. New information has come to light or new information has been brought to me and now I changed my mind. I mean it's that simple. That's all they have to do. So I don't want to like get off on this tangent about Canada because I could talk about this for hours because it's oh no, it's awful up here. Um, but getting back to your book, so I think Canada's a bit different because I mean, majority of our population. So Montreal has 3 million people. Toronto has about seven. So a quarter of our population lives in those two cities, and then the rest is kind of spread out all over the place. But whereas in the States, I mean, you have like LA, New York, and places like that that are heavily populated, but you at least still have like the Midwest and like like the Rust Belt and like these working class locations. So did you travel around there? Did you speak to any of the people? Like what were your feelings like when you were doing research for the book?
Yes, I traveled around the country. I interviewed a lot of people to sort of take the temperature, people from across the political divide, really. And what I found was that a lot unites working class people, irrespective of where they live and who they vote for, they have a very similar ideology.
Okay, on that. So if you're woke and you have to be for BLM, you have to be for the trans rights, you have to like if you deviate even slightly from one of those things, you're kicked out of the club. But like, what was the feeling with the working class? Like, did they, you have to agree with 60% of what we say, or was it just more of, oh, you just got to agree to work hard? Like, what was the sentiment
No,
there?
they had so they, first of all, they worked almost everyone worked with people they disagreed with politically and they couldn't care less. They were completely happy to do so. It would never occur to them to hold somebody's vote against them as a human. But they also very much agreed, even across party lines, about ideology. Even though they wouldn't have, necessarily known that. Like they would probably assume that the person who votes for a Democrat, if they're Republican, really disagrees with them on abortion or really disagrees with them on immigration. When the truth is, like, actually, they really don't disagree. But they were actually completely happy to be friends, like even assuming that they did. Like they would never hold voting for Trump against somebody like that. Just sort of, I met couples who were like, he's a Trump voter and she's not. Or I met a lesbian couple where one of them was a Trump voter, one of them was a Biden voter. I mean, this like the polarization that we have in the elites is like a completely elite phenomenon.
Um, do you think part of the problem is that, quote unquote elites don't actually go do what you did and speak to people? Because I remember I saw a tweet from Thomas Chatterton Williams. Now he's someone I respect. I think like his book, what was it called? Portrait in Black and White. I mean, great book. I think he's I respect his opinions a lot, but he put something out. Someone had wrote a review of something, and he's like, "Oh, well, you don't have a college degree, and I've got a blah 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 master's, and I had trouble understanding this book. How do you think you can understand it?" And it's like that attitude of, "Oh, I know better than you." But I'm sorry. If you had an arts degree from university, you could have saved yourself a hell of a lot of money by just getting a library card. You know, and
Yeah, there's a lot of contempt for the working class among the elites. It's based on this kind of credentialism. that reigns supreme. Like they really think that to be a full citizen in a society, like you need a credential, and that's what they like. And there is this feeling of like they very begrudgingly extend the franchise to like working class people, but they would really rather not. And working class people are most of the country, so it's like it's really contemptible the way that they talk and act.
I mean, do they not see that, okay, if you buy up all the farmland and you talk down to farmers and you get rid of them, you're not going to eat anymore. You know, you you gut your automobile industry, you're not going to be able to buy a car. Like, is there just some kind of dissonance, or I mean, is it just gaps in knowledge, or are they so educated that they no longer have common sense? Like, I don't get that. It's so self-defeating.
They live in places where a lot of the working class labor is done by immigrants, illegal immigrants. And so they're very happy for those people to work as slaves, as cartel slaves, to service them hand and foot because they feel like, well, you're here because I let you in, because with my great, my amazing soul, I, believe in open borders. And so they feel like those people probably agree with them. Like they think that this country would be completely self-sufficient without the working class. And they've done a very good job of creating an economy that, I mean, that's the economy they want, right? They want all manufacturing to be done in China, all agricultural work and service industry jobs to be done by illegal immigrants from failed socialist states, right? And everybody else to live on universal basic income. Like that's kind of the model of, the economy that the Democrats have been pushing for the last, 30, 40 years. So yeah, they don't see themselves as dependent on these people. And they'd much rather be dependent on, illegal immigrants.
Yeah. No, but like that kind of mentality and that kind of like I said, I saw it in my work. So I did a lot of work with the military, and I would see it there. So I work in IT. Yeah, I have a bachelor of arts in political science, and I ended up in IT. But I saw the administrative class as opposed to all the tradespeople who were on the base, and I'm like, yeah, fine, you're working as an accounting clerk, and that guy's a plumber. But that accounting clerk or that HR clerk would hold the plumber in such low regard. I'm like, okay, you know, I guarantee you he's making more money than you are. I guarantee you has a lot more common sense than you do. The guy's actually in touch with people. You can add up numbers on a balance sheet, or you can do a performance review on someone. But like, what else do you bring to the table? And I mean, I saw that it was ridiculous. Like, we're all stuck in Afghanistan. We're all trying to work here, but you hold these people in such low regard because you think they work with their hands that they're lesser somehow. And it's maybe it was the way I was raised. My dad had a university degree, but he owned a factory. Um, he, he never taught me to look down on people because of their degree. And it's like that mentality really, really rubs me the wrong way. That this unearned sense of superiority because you read a few more books than someone else.
Yeah, and it's especially despicable because working class people work so much harder than people in the knowledge industry. They do backbreaking physical labor. They do stuff that we would rather not do so that we don't have to do it. And instead of being grateful and humble about that, we've created an economy that punishes them and makes it almost impossible for them to achieve the American dream. And yeah, that's unacceptable.
Hey, I know you got to get going, so last question before I let you go. What do you think is going to happen in November?
I hate prognosticating, but I'd be very surprised if Trump didn't win. It's going to come down to turnout, you know, like it's going to come down to do these black men who actually have come to really like him, are they really going to like show up at the ballot booth and pull the lever for him? It's going to come down to whether auto workers feel strongly enough that Biden has betrayed them with EV mandates to show up and actually vote against what their union is telling them to vote for. It's going to come down to, 40,000 votes in a bunch of swing districts. And it's a very exciting time. I mean, it's just a very exciting time because it will tell us a lot about the country, where we're at. And um, honestly, everybody's always saying like they wish it was between two different people, but I
Yeah.
think this is great. I'm really enjoying it. So
Okay. All my take on the U.S. election coming up, and it's sort of similar to what I had in the last couple of Canadian elections, is okay, neither of those old decrepit men are worth my vote. If I was an American citizen and I was there voting, I would vote down ticket. There's no way. Yes, I think Biden's. I don't like. I don't think he's woke. I don't think he's aware enough of what's going on to be woke or to be against it. It's someone else pushing his policies that he's just nodding along with. But I don't think Trump knows what he's doing either.
mhm,
I mean, don't forget under Trump, there was all kinds of CRT and DEI going on in a lot of federal agencies under Trump when he was president. So he has no clue. So I would vote down ticket. And what I've said in the last couple of Canadian elections as well is just spoil our ballots because our spoiled ballots get counted. So if I go to if I go to my polling station and I spoil my ballot and put it in, they'll say like, X% of ballots are spoiled. And I was trying to convince my friends in the last two Canadian elections to say, look, if enough of us spoil our ballots and it's a close election, the parties that lose will say, "Hey, we could have gotten an extra 10% of votes and maybe won." And they might put in a stronger candidate. And the party that won might have realized, "Hey, we just barely skimmed by. We need better candidates or something." So that's what I've been trying to do. This election, I mean, I have to vote against the Liberals just because I mean their speech law that's being debated right now. If they think that I might commit a hate crime, I can get 6 months of house arrest and $75,000 in fine if they think that I might commit a hate crime. Not that I have committed one or I've used hate speech or whatever, anything like that. Just if they think it. Um, so yeah, I mean, I want to get that out, and I don't want that anywhere near. I don't want them anywhere near power, so I'm going to vote against them. But like, have you thought about that in the States, like voting down ticket and just? I don't know if enough people just said we don't want either of these idiots. We'll vote for our congressman. We'll vote for certain initiatives that are going on, this and that, but we're not going to vote for president. And you let that to the extremes, you can kind of see which party has more extremes. Then I guess I don't know. Would you ever consider that, or you're still not sure?
I think both of them are very popular, so I wouldn't. No, I think that the narrative is just wrong. I mean, I think yeah. I think that the fact that like they both kind of, won their primaries pretty handily suggests that they both are very popular and this is the exact election that the American people want.
Okay. Look, like I said, I know you got to get going, but any last words, or if you want to let people know where they can get your book, I'll put all the links in the description.
That would be great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for coming back on, and yeah, like I said, I'll put everything in the description. Have a good day. Thanks a lot, and
Thanks,
thank
you
everyone for
too.
listening.